When the flames rose higher, it wasn't the millionaire's wealth that mattered. It was the nanny's courage. Glespi was a man everyone in the city knew. A millionaire businessman, owner of vast lands, a mansion that touched the sky, and cars that shined brighter than the sun. He had money, power, and status, everything except peace inside his heart. Behind the walls of his mansion, there was silence. A silence that even the laughter of his only son could not completely break. His son, Liam, was the only light in his life. Glespi had lost his wife years ago, and since then he had raised Liam with a heart full of both love and fear. He feared losing him, feared that something might take away the only person who kept him human. But being a busy man, Glespi could not be there for Liam all the time. That was where Poja came in. She was not born rich, not polished like the high society women who surrounded Glespi, but she had a quality no amount of money could buy, a heart that could love unconditionally. Poja worked as a nanny in Glespi's house, but she treated Liam as if he were her own younger brother, or even her own child. She was gentle, yet firm, playful, yet protective. Liam adored her. Wherever Poja went, he followed. If she read him stories, he would listen with wide eyes. If she sang him lullabies, he would sleep peacefully. And if he ever cried, it was Poja's embrace, not the expensive toys, that calmed him down. Glespi noticed this bond, but never admitted how deeply it moved him. He told himself that Poja was just an employee, but somewhere deep inside, he knew her presence was holding his family together. It was the night of celebration. Glespi was hosting a charity gala in his mansion's garden. Hundreds of guests arrived, women in sparkling gowns and men in sharp suits. Laughter, music, and clinking glasses filled the air. Fire torches decorated the pathway, and the stables nearby had been lit up too, because Glespi's estate was famous for its horses. Liam, however, was restless. Big parties bored him. He tugged at Poja's hand. "Poja, can we go see the horses?" he whispered. Poja hesitated. She knew Glespi wouldn't like it if Liam wandered off. But she also knew how much the boy loved the stables. Only for a little while. She finally agreed, smiling. They slipped away quietly, their laughter disappearing into the cool night. The stables were quiet at first, the horses calm. Liam giggled and pointed at his favorite chestnut horse, while Poja stroked its mane. But then, suddenly, a crackle, a spark, and within seconds, fire burst from the dry hay in the corner. The flame grew wild, licking the wooden beams, spreading faster than they could comprehend. The horses neighed in panic, kicking against the stalls. Smoke thickened, filling the air. "Poja!" Liam cried, clutching her arm. She froze for a moment, her mind racing. She had to protect Liam. She tried to lead him out, but in the chaos, a burning beam collapsed, blocking the exit. The fire roared louder, swallowing everything around them. At the mansion, guests screamed as they saw the glow of fire. Glespi turned his head and froze. His stables were in flames. His heart slammed against his chest. "My son, Liam is in there!" he shouted, panic breaking his usual calm tone. Without thinking, Glespi ran toward the fire, but the heat was unbearable, the smoke choking. Security and workers tried to hold him back. "Sir, it's too dangerous!" they shouted. But Glespi roared back, "That's my child!" And just as he was about to plunge in, he saw something, someone, through the smoke. Poja's brave choice inside. Liam coughed violently, tears streaming down his face. He clung to Poja. "I'm scared," he sobbed. Poja knelt to his level, holding his face in her hands. "Listen to me, Liam. You are brave. You trust me, don't you?" He nodded weakly. "Then hold on tight. I'm going to get you out." She knew what she had to do. With a deep breath, she pulled Liam close against her chest, wrapped her shawl around his head to shield him from the smoke, and looked at the wall of flames between them and the door. There was no time to think, only to act. She tightened her hold and charged through the fire. Sparks flew, her arm seared with pain as fire brushed her skin, but she did not let go, and then, bursting through the door, she stumbled into the open air, Liam still safe in her arms. Glespi, who had been fighting to break through, saw them emerge. For a moment, time stopped. He saw his son coughing but alive. And the young nanny, her hair singed, her clothes covered in ash. her arms burned but still holding Liam like he was the most precious thing in the world. The guests gasped. Some even clapped in shock and relief. But Glespi's heart, his heart froze. This wasn't just bravery. This was sacrifice. This woman, who had no blood relation to him, had risked her life, without hesitation, for his son. He ran forward, taking Liam into his arms, hugging him so tightly the boy squeaked. Tears streamed down Glespi's face, something his business rivals and wealthy guests had never seen before. But then his eyes turned to Poja. She swayed on her feet, weak from smoke inhalation, her arm blistered. Yet she smiled faintly, whispering, "He's safe. That's all that matters." And before anyone could stop it, Poja collapsed. The chaos of the fire still echoed in everyone's ears, but all Glespi could hear was the faint sound of Poja's breathing as she lay unconscious in the ambulance. Liam clung tightly to his father's coat, refusing to let go. His little hands shook, but his eyes stayed fixed on the woman who had just saved his life. "Daddy," Liam whispered, his voice trembling, "is Poja going to die?" Glespi swallowed hard. He had faced business wars, courtroom battles, and hostile takeovers without blinking an eye. But right now he couldn't find words for his son. He reached out and stroked Liam's hair gently. "She's strong, son," he said finally, though his voice cracked. "She won't leave us." The emergency room smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Nurses rushed around, doctors called for bandages and oxygen masks. Poja was wheeled away while Glespi and Liam waited outside, their faces pale with fear. For hours, time seemed frozen. Glespi paced the corridor, his usually calm, authoritative stride now broken and restless. He wasn't thinking of business deals or profits. He was thinking of the woman who had thrown herself into fire for a child that wasn't even her own. At last, the doctor came out, pulling off his gloves. "She has burns on her arm and smoke inhalation," the doctor explained. "But she's alive. It will take time to heal, but with care she'll recover." Relief swept over Glespi like a wave. His knees almost gave way, but he steadied himself. He turned to Liam, who was clutching his toy car with white knuckles. "See? I told you," Glespi whispered, hugging his son close. "She's strong." When Poja finally opened her eyes, she found herself in a white hospital room. The first thing she saw was Liam, fast asleep in a chair beside her bed, his tiny hand still holding hers. The sight made her heart ache with tenderness. And then she noticed Glespi, standing near the window. But he wasn't the cold, distant figure she was used to. He looked tired, his shoulders heavy, his eyes red as though he hadn't slept. "You're awake," he said softly, stepping forward. His voice didn't carry the sharp tone of a businessman. It carried gratitude, almost humility. Poja tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her arm made her wince. "Don't," Glespi said quickly, helping her adjust her pillow. "The doctor said you need rest." There was an awkward silence. Finally, Poja spoke. Is he all right?" "He's fine," Glespi said, glancing at his son with a softness that surprised even him. "Because of you," she smiled faintly, her eyes moist. "That's all that matters." Over the next few days, Glespi visited Poja every morning before his meetings and every evening after. He brought her flowers, though he never admitted they were from him. He made sure the hospital staff gave her the best care, the best room, the best of everything. But more than that, he stayed. Sometimes he sat quietly in the corner, watching her and Liam laugh together as if the hospital walls didn't exist. Sometimes he would catch himself staring at her, at the way she smiled through her pain, at the way she put others before herself, at the way she never once complained. It puzzled him. He had met countless people in his life, powerful businessmen, elegant women from high society, but no one had ever moved him the way Poja did. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the room filled with a warm orange glow, Glespi spoke words he never thought he'd say. "I owe you everything," he said quietly. Poja blinked, surprised. "You don't owe me anything, sir. Liam is like family to me." "I couldn't let anything happen to him. Still," Glespi's voice faltered. "You risked your life. Not for money, not for recognition, for him. For me, that means more than you know." Liam's innocent truth. It was Liam, however, who broke the invisible wall between them. One night, as Poja tucked him in while still recovering, he whispered loudly enough for his father to hear, "Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to marry someone like Poja, because she's the bravest and kindest person in the whole world." Poja laughed softly, brushing Liam's hair back. "Oh, Liam, you're too sweet." But Glespi didn't laugh. He froze, the boy's words echoing in his mind. The bravest and kindest person. For the first time in years, he felt his heart stir, not with business ambition, not with social pride, but with something simpler, deeper, and far more terrifying. Of course, in a world as sharp-eyed as Glespi's, nothing stayed private for long. The story of the nanny who ran into fire for the millionaire's son spread quickly. Guests who had witnessed it spoke in hushed admiration. The media got a whiff of it too. Soon, headlines appeared. "The nanny who saved the millionaire's heir. Heroic sacrifice at Glespi mansion party." Some painted Poja as a heroine. Others whispered questions. Why was the millionaire spending so much time at the hospital? Why did he look at the nanny that way? But Glespi didn't care. For once in his life, he ignored the noise of the world. His focus was only on two people, his son and the woman who had become the quiet, beating heart of their home. A silent realization one evening, after Liam had fallen asleep in the hospital chair again. Glespi found himself standing by Poja's bedside. She was half asleep, her face pale but peaceful. He looked at her for a long time, his chest heavy with words he couldn't say. In that silence, he admitted something to himself. "I don't just admire her bravery. I need her, more than I've ever needed anyone." But he said nothing out loud. Instead, he adjusted the blanket around her gently, like a man who was learning tenderness for the very first time. And that was the beginning of a change that would not only stun Glespi, but also the world around him. The days passed slowly, yet everything seemed different in Glespi's life. He had always been the man who controlled empires, who measured time in contracts and profits. Now he found himself counting the minutes until he could sit by Poja's side. He watched her laugh with Liam, even when her arm was still bandaged, even when pain sometimes flickered across her face. She carried her suffering quietly, never letting it overshadow the joy she gave to others. For Glespi, this was something he could not understand. Money had always been his shield. Power had always been his weapon. But Poja, she had neither, and still, she was stronger than anyone he had ever met. One evening, after a long day at the hospital, Poja insisted she was well enough to return to the mansion. She didn't want to take more of Glespi's resources. But when she said this, he felt anger rising in his chest. "Don't ever say that again," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. "You saved my son. There is nothing you can take from me that could ever balance that debt." Poja lowered her gaze, humbled by his words. "I didn't do it for a debt, sir. Liam means the world to me. I would do it again, even if it cost me everything." Her words sank into him like arrows. He turned away before she could see the emotion in his eyes. For a man who had lived surrounded by walls of pride, her sincerity was breaking down his defenses, brick by brick. Life at the mansion slowly resumed, but nothing felt the same. Liam followed Poja more closely than ever, holding her hand, refusing to sleep unless she was nearby. And Glespi, he found himself noticing things he had never seen before. The way her hair caught the light of the morning sun, the way her voice softened when she spoke to Liam, the way her presence filled the cold halls with warmth. Yet, outside the mansion, the world was not so kind. Rumors spread like wildfire. Wealthy guests who had attended the gala whispered behind fans and glasses of wine. A nanny and a millionaire? Impossible. Some laughed, others pitied Poja, calling her foolish for staying under the same roof. To them, she was a servant who had stepped into a role far above her place. One afternoon, when Poja went to the local market, she overheard two women speaking. She thinks saving his son makes her part of his family. As if a man like Glespi would ever look at her that way. Their words cut her, though she tried not to show it. That night, she sat quietly in her small room at the mansion, wondering if perhaps she had allowed herself to feel too much. But Liam, innocent and unaware of society's judgments, had no such doubts. He clambered onto her bed with his little toy car and whispered, "Poja, when you were in the fire, I was so scared. I thought I'd lose you. Don't ever leave me, okay?" Tears pricked her eyes. She hugged him tightly, whispering back, "I'll never leave you, Liam. Never." Unbeknownst to her, Glespi had been standing at the doorway, listening. The sincerity of her promise struck him harder than any words ever could. She wasn't bound to Liam by blood, but her loyalty was greater than most families he knew. He thought of the so-called friends who came to his mansion only to drink his wine, use his name, and gossip behind his back. Compared to them, this simple woman had given him something priceless, love without condition. But love was dangerous, wasn't it? Glespi knew what society would say. He knew the backlash, the whispers, the mocking headlines. Yet every day, his heart betrayed him a little more. Late one night, he sat in his office, staring at the fire in the fireplace. He thought of his late wife, of the loneliness that had followed her death, of the years he had buried himself in work just to forget. And then he thought of Poja, her bravery, her laughter, her tears. He realized he wasn't just grateful to her. He was falling for her. The thought terrified him. A millionaire falling for a nanny? It would stun his world, his rivals, his circle of so-called friends. But as he clenched his fists and shut his eyes, one truth refused to be silenced. He needed her, not just for Liam, but for himself. And though he had not yet spoken a word of it, his heart had already chosen. Glespi's mansion had never felt so alive. The fire incident had passed, but its memory lingered in every corner of the estate. Everyone knew the story now. The nanny who risked her life for the millionaire's son. Guests who once looked at Poja as nothing more than staff now eyed her with curiosity, some with admiration, and others with envy. But for Poja, none of it mattered. She did not crave attention or glory. She only cared that Liam was safe, and that his laughter once again filled the house. Still, the whispers never ended. At social gatherings, Glespi overheard comments spoken just low enough to sting. "She's trying to climb her way up with sympathy. A nanny in his mansion after all this drama? It looks improper. If he really respects himself, he'll send her away." Every word was like poison, but Poja ignored them. She told herself she didn't belong in Glespi's world, that she was only here for Liam. But sometimes, late at night, she found herself thinking of the way Glespi's eyes softened when they met hers, or how his voice grew tender when he spoke to her. She tried to bury those feelings, but her heart betrayed her. One evening, the mansion hosted another charity dinner. The halls were filled with elegant gowns and polished shoes, chandeliers glowing above. Liam, dressed neatly in a tiny suit, clung to Poja's hand as they entered the grand hall. Some guests smiled politely at her, others barely hid their disdain. During the dinner, Liam tugged at Poja's sleeve. "Poja," he whispered, "come sit at our table." She hesitated. The main table was reserved for Glespi and his elite guests. But before she could answer, Glespi himself stood up, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. "Poja," he called, his voice firm, carrying over the chatter. "Come here. Sit beside me." The entire hall fell silent. Glasses paused mid-air, forks froze. Everyone turned to look. A nanny, invited to the table of honor. Gasps whispered across the room. Poja's cheeks burned, but Liam tugged harder. "Come on, Poja," he urged, pulling her forward. She walked hesitantly, her steps echoing in the silence. When she reached the table, Glespi stood and pulled out the chair beside him, a gesture no one had ever expected from a man of his pride. As she sat, Glespi rested his hand on the table, his gaze steady, unshaken by the murmurs. "This woman," he said clearly, his voice like steel, "is not just a nanny. She is the reason my son is alive today. She is braver than all of us who stood frozen that night. And she deserves not whispers behind her back, but respect." The room erupted into shocked silence. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others whispered even louder. But Glespi did not care. For the first time in years, he had spoken not as a businessman guarding his image, but as a man protecting his heart. Poja's eyes shimmered with tears. She had never asked for recognition, never wanted the spotlight. But hearing those words, seeing the sincerity in his gaze, she realized something. This man, feared by many, was baring his soul for her. After the dinner, when the guests had left and the mansion was quiet again, Glespi found Poja in the garden. She stood under the moonlight, the night air cool against her face. "Why did you do that?" she asked softly when he approached. "You didn't have to. Defend me like that." He stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. "Poja, I've lived a life surrounded by wealth, power, and people who only see me as a name, a bank, a title. But you ran into fire without thinking twice. You love my son like he's your own. And somewhere along the way," he paused, his eyes locking with hers, "you saved me too," her breath caught. She tried to speak, but words tangled in her throat. "I don't care what the world says," Glespi continued. "I don't care about their rules, their gossip, their pride. All I know is I don't want to imagine this house or my life without you in it." Tears slipped down Poja's cheeks. She had never dreamed of hearing these words. For so long she had told herself she didn't belong. Yet here he was, choosing her openly, fearlessly. Before she could respond, Liam's small voice cut through the night. He had woken and wandered into the garden, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Daddy, Poja? Why are you crying?" Poja quickly wiped her face, smiling through her tears. But Glespi bent down, lifting his son into his arms. "Liam," he said gently, "would you like Poja to stay with us? Not just as your nanny, but as part of our family." Liam's face lit up instantly. He threw his arms around both of them, shouting, "Yes! Yes, I want Poja forever!" In that moment, under the stars, the walls around Glespi's heart finally crumbled. He reached for Poja's hand, holding it firmly, as if sealing a promise. No fire, no gossip, no power could ever break. And Poja, with tears of joy, squeezed his hand back. She had saved Liam from the flames, but in the end, it was love that had saved them all. The end.